You'll know who I am. So my name's Matt. My name's Matt Sullivan, and I'm the MD of the Alliance of Independent Agencies. And we organise these GreenJam events every 2 weeks. I like to phrase them as events that are targeted at, but not limited to, people in their first 5 years of agency life. All sorts of things, really. A really nice eclectic mix of events. If you joined us towards the end of last year, you know, we had a speed mentoring session. That was really good. Before that, we had Sir Martin Sorrell joined. Next one, in 2 weeks' time, we've got a police hostage negotiator joining us. But a key thread that's kind of has some continuity throughout all of these events. It's really that you lovely people on this call, I should say. So it's the people in agencies. That's a massive focus for us as an organisation. We absolutely believe that you are your agency's most important and key asset, and you need to be looked after. And that comes in all different guises, right? So like most people at the moment, we talk a lot about well-being and we talk a lot about mental health, as most agencies and companies are, and that, of course, is a great thing. But I was having a conversation in the autumn of last year around this with Connor Broadley. I'll make the introductions in a moment. We realised that this kind of phrase, financial well-being, just doesn't really get mentioned a lot. And for us, we feel it's inextricably linked to other forms of well-being. And we run a lot of events around managing stress and mental well-being. So it felt quite natural that we needed to delve a little bit deeper into this area. And whilst on the call to Connor Broadley, who are experts in this area, we asked them if they would give up a bit of time and help co-host an event and just go a little bit deeper into financial well-being. And now Connor Broadley, they'll tell you a little bit more about their company, but a lot of what they'll focus on, you know, if you're lucky enough in the next 20 years to have sold your agency for 20 million quid, they'll help you navigate spending that money. But this is specifically aimed at a slightly younger crowd and people in the beginnings of agency life, because financial well-being is important for everybody, not just the people that have exited their agency. So that's a specific focus, if you like. So James Linsey has joined us from Connor Broadley. James, welcome. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
Cheers, Matt.
I'm going to let you take the floor in a moment, James. I know he's got some slides to talk you all through. If you're a regular green jammer, if you like, I had this kind of regular little saying is that we love to see your faces. Please do leave your video on. I know that it's not always feasible for everyone. I've gaffer taped my kids to the landing ceiling so they don't interfere with me at the moment, but I'm sure you've got lots going on in your homes. But please do press mute if you can, because it makes it a lot easier for the presenter to talk. And questions, we'd welcome any questions. You can put them in the chat room. You can post questions to everybody. Not everyone likes to do that, so you can also post a question and just post it to myself. So you'll see my name, Matt Sullivan. Especially maybe with topics like this, you might want to do that. Please feel free to do so, and I'll pose your questions to James at the end. I just won't mention your name. I think I've covered everything. As I said, we've got some exciting things coming up. I'll talk about them at the end, but you can see a list of all the GreenJam events online at the allindependentagencies.org. James, are you okay if I hand over to you and let you talk a little bit more about financial well-being?
Great, yeah. Let me just try and share my screen. We've got some slides to run through. It's the tricky bit. All good?
Yeah, perfect.
Lovely. Well, thanks for the introduction, Matt. Just to kind of expand. So yeah, so Connor Broadley, we're an independent wealth management company. So providing financial planning and investment management services to individuals, but also advising companies on things like how they can set up and manage employee benefits. That's often things like setting up company pension schemes and things like that. So we work with lots of different agencies, largely in the kind of creative and media space. And so whilst the majority of my work is advising individuals on their personal finances, I also get the chance to and the company to run financial planning clinics for the companies and employees we work with. So really, going into these companies and speaking with lots of different individuals about, providing financial guidance, to any kind of financial matters they might want to discuss. And also, providing some education, because there's lots of things on, in terms of personal finances that don't really get covered in school or anything like that. So, there's often lots of questions that people really want to ask. So kind of through all of these kind of clinics and conversations we have, one of the main questions that we come across a lot is just, where can I start? People really just want to steer on what they can do. So I've got some slides here we'll run through on just some simple things that, we think everyone can really should do to help get on top of their personal finances, and really onto that well-being point of help, ensure your financial well-being. And as Matt said, I'll run through, but if you've got any questions throughout, just shout and we can cover them off whenever. So on the well-being point, we see well-being as being, having three separate aspects. There's clearly, mental health. That's a very, key consideration at the minute. So ensuring people are able to kind of deal with the normal stresses of daily life. There's physical well-being or physical health. So that's, leading active and, healthy lifestyles, which impacts physical health. But one we think is often kind of not represented and often overlooked is financial well-being. So that's really, making sure people are financially secure, and also kind of able and feeling in control of their finances and equally, their lives. So, we think financial well-being is very important, and we know that financial worries and concerns can really have an impact on people, like their well-being, and equally how they might perform at work. And there's data about this up. So here's just a few. Here's a few stats really, just that we've pulled together, just showing how that kind of how that comes through. So a quarter of employees lose sleep over financial worries. Around 60% feel that it prevents them performing their well at work, and then a half of employees are worried about being able to retire. So all things that really can affect someone's financial and overall well-being. And as I say, there's some simple things that we think everyone can do to help help secure their well-being. First of all, almost the most simple thing here is that everyone should make a budget. This is kind of just setting out all of the different kind of expenses in your life, and making sure you just have a really clear view on how you are spending each month. It can be really broken down into three main things. So you have your needs, your wants, and your savings. So to start with, you should really look to cover and think about your kind of essential costs. So that might be things like your household and living expenses. So rent or mortgage, other kind of household bills, so things like utilities, and then also the other kind of essential spending, so things like your food shop and your travel, although that's probably pretty sort of minimal at the minute. They're the key bits. So there's your kind of your needs that you need to cover. Aside from that, you then have what we could call wants. So these are this is kind of your discretionary spending. So what do you really want to be spending your money on each month? So you might want to think about kind of subscriptions or any hobbies you might have that you really want to make sure you continue. You might almost feel that's like an essential need, but they're things you should have a really clear view on how much they cost. And then another thing that is often overlooked is trying to include savings as part of your budget. We think this is a really important point. So building in a regular savings amount into your monthly budget, almost having the same importance as covering your essential costs in some ways. And now there's lots of different ways you can, there's lots of different budgeting rules that people can use. I'm not particularly subscribing to any one here, although this is actually based on one that's known as the 50-30-20 rule. So it's 50% of your income going towards your needs, 30% towards your wants, and then making sure you save 20% of your net income each month. Like I say, not subscribing to any one, but the key point is that they all put a real focus on including savings in your budget each month. So, okay, I can't sort of say it enough times. We really would encourage people to get into a habit of saving on a regular basis, and including that within your budget. So this is a quote taken from or said by Warren Buffett. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world, a very well-known and respected and successful investor. So a man in the know when it comes to building wealth and saving and investing. And really what this kind of quote is getting to, and what I take from it, is the real importance of trying to prioritize saving. So saving over spending, not looking to do your, what you might look to save each month as a kind of an afterthought after having covered all your essential bills and having spent freely throughout the month, but really building that in as the first thing you kind of think about, which we think is really important. There's a number of ways you can look to kind of get into this savings habit. The main thing, and something I certainly subscribe to, is trying to save on payday. So as soon as you get paid, putting that percentage that you feel like you can save each month into a separate savings account. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You can also set up a standing order each month so that you automatically pay these amounts over, so you don't ever forget on any months. You might also want to consider there's now kind of new accounts and apps you can use, so mobile apps that can round up your spending. So they'll link to your kind of the transactions on your bank account. So for example, if you spend £2.50 on a coffee, you can set it so that it would round up that purchase to £3, meaning you save 50p into a savings account. Little things just to get you into this habit of saving regularly. And you might also want to think about setting up separate saving pots for different needs. So you might be saving for a new car or a holiday, or just generally building up your savings. You might find it helpful to have separate pots so you can have a clear view of how that goal is progressing. Are you close to building up what you need for that? And really, I guess, however you do it, just try and get into the habit of saving on a regular basis. You can also think about maybe, if you ever get sort of lucky enough to get pay rises, when you get your pay rise, think about saving, the difference in your take-home pay rather than looking to spend it. You won't feel, the effect of that, because your net income will remain the same, but you'll be saving, and equally, you won't be. That can kind of avoid something which is known as lifestyle inflation. So spending more as you earn more. So I'm sure this is a question that crops up for lots of people. Kind of one of life's big questions. Where does your money go every month when you've stripped out all of those various costs you need to cover? So it's worth giving some thought. If you added up the cost of your coffee on the commute to work, every day, over the week, and then over the course of a year, how much would that add up to? Once you've given that some thought and kind of added that up, you'll probably get a good idea of actually where your kind of where your spending is going each month. Certain ways to kind of think about your spending. You can use like online banking or mobile budgeting apps. They can help kind of categorize your spending and track any upcoming payments. Really like helping you see, how much are you spending on, say, coffee every week and different things like that. Once you've got a clear view of what you are spending each month, you can then see, where you might want to cut back on certain things. If it was, say, saving on the cost of your kind of coffee purchases each week, or even just seeing, whether there's kind of services or subscriptions that you're not making full use of, or you weren't even aware that you were paying for. So just have a clear view and try and get an idea of exactly where you are spending each month. And this is not really a case of kind of trying to strip out all of the fun things from someone's budget, but just trying to make a point of spending on things that kind of bring you joy, not just wasting your money on things that you weren't even aware of. So by getting into a habit of saving on a regular basis, again, that thing that we're really encouraging everyone to do, the benefit to you, in addition to building up your savings, is that you can really start to make your money work for you. And this comes about by kind of a very well-known mathematical concept known as compound interest, which can really help kind of build the value of savings over time. And in short, compound interest is effectively just earning interest on the interest already earned. So take the example of having a cash account. So on your savings account, you'll earn interest over the course of the year. When that interest will then be applied to the account, the following year, you'll then start to earn interest again, but you'll be earning interest on the interest earned from last year, and so on and so on. You can see how that can really have a snowball effect that builds up over years, and can really, really helps build the value of, say, savings. And that can also apply to, if you have investments as well. So it's a really important concept, and it only kind of increases over time. So it's really important, we think, to start early in terms of any savings and let that kind of money work for you. And then just to illustrate the point, really, and again, returning to that cost of your morning coffee. One of my colleagues actually wrote an article recently in which she sort of made this quote and ran some numbers. Yes, so she looked at an example where if you saved the cost of your coffee every day, so the cost of your daily coffee on your commute, invested those funds so investing the funds rather than spending the money on buying the coffee. She projected that after 30 years, you'd have a pot worth around £59,000. So purely illustrative, and it's sort of based on some standard growth investment growth assumptions, but hopefully just illustrates the point that really these small changes can have a really big difference. They might not seem anything now, but over time, and given time to grow and build through that compounding, it really can have an impact. So another point on sort of savings, even if you're not kind of think that you're saving for anything in particular, it's really worth kind of having. We really encourage people to have savings set aside for kind of rainy day purposes. So having an emergency fund, so easy access savings that you can draw on to cover any emergencies or unexpected costs which might arise. As a rule of thumb, we typically say to hold at least 3 months worth of your essential outgoings. So that's going back to those kind of the wants in your budget. Holding 3 months worth of those in just an easy access savings account you can get to whenever you like. That means you can cover those unexpected costs which arise, and sort of equally importantly, it'll also give you some security if you ever find yourself outside of work. So have a think, if you were to find yourself outside of work, how would you support yourself without the income coming in, and without thinking about kind of any state benefits you might be able to claim. So we really think that building up these rainy day funds, and we think it's really important to save for those rainy days, just given the financial security that provides. And that's particularly the case, if you're on short-term contracts or work on a freelance basis, that risk of being out of work is greater. So we'd really encourage people to focus on having that rainy day fund, and really comes back to that thing of building up, again, saving again on a regular basis, trying to save when you do have money, so you're more secure when you don't. And furthermore, so by building up those emergency cash savings, it can also help you to avoid sort of needing to rely on debt. By having those funds set aside, we think it's really important to stay on top of debt. It's something that can very easily spiral out of control, and is all too kind of easily ignored. in fact, we often have conversations in the financial planning clinics we run with companies where, you know, people, often young people have taken on debt, and often there's a bit of a tendency to almost ignore debt, not take action, and kind of just pretend it's not there. And like I say, if it's ignored, it really can kind of escalate and kind of spiral out of control. And you know, people do have debt. Sort of the stats kind of shows it here. You know, around 40% of young people do have financial debts. That's aside from things like student loans. This will be things like credit card and personal loans. So really, you know, if you find that you are kind of relying on credit cards or being overdrawn, you can always kind of seek help if if you're finding it hard to get out of that kind of that debt spiral. There's lots of different kind of reputable charities you can get help from. You might have to look at the Money Advice Service. That's like a government website that's provides lots of kind of free and impartial advice on lots of kind of money matters, and they can point you in the direction of those charities who might be able to help. But generally, you know, the main thing with kind of say credit card debt is, you know, try to make sure you keep up, you know, the full repayments each month. That means you can really just keep on top of it and you know, not be relying on having to draw on that debt. And equally maintaining kind of personal loan repayments and things like that. Now, another thing, sort of almost returning to that, thinking about, you know, how much you're spending each month. If you're finding it difficult to save and would like to try and free up, you know, funds within your budget each month, another thing you can do is to shop around for the services you receive. So the main thing you might want to consider is things like your household bills. So that's energy or your internet, or, mobile phone contracts, because there often can be some savings by switching providers, or at the very least speaking with your existing providers and making sure you're on the right tariffs and not overpaying for the services you receive. So here's just a few kind of examples of the savings you might expect by switching. So on average, what a household can save by switching their energy supplier, and also switching their broadband provider. And then also there's some kind of a survey that shows I think it's 7 out of 10 people on average could save £222 a year by switching to a more appropriate phone contract. All just examples taken from the Money Advice Service, but you know, it is something that a lot of people can save lots of money by doing this regularly. You might feel that it's not something you want to be doing. It's, you know, reviewing this every year, but you know, try to make sure that you're not overpaying for what you're getting. At the end of the day, it can just leave you with more funds available to save, and equally more to spend on your wants in your budget. So there's hopefully some sort of useful tips of things that you can do in terms of managing your finances. I thought I'd just finish with touching on pensions. So this is a very common theme and question we get from people who attend the financial clinics we run. Now, pensions are, for many people, are going to be the main way of saving for life beyond work. Yeah, lots of people, don't really know how they work, don't know kind of where they are, and have never really engaged, with their pensions. So, in short, and if kind of people aren't aware, pensions are effectively just a long-term savings and investment vehicle. So, a way to save up funds over the longer term for when you step back from work. They have a few kind of specific rules attached to them, which I'll come on to. But effectively, they're most commonly set up through work. So through auto enrolment, which was introduced sort of many years ago, companies now have a responsibility to set up a pension scheme for their employees. So you're automatically kind of opted into a company pension scheme unless you choose to opt out. you and your employer pay into the pension scheme with some amounts set by the government, although you can pay more in than that. Your contributions benefit from tax relief, so it's a very tax efficient and favourable way to save and invest longer term. And you equally benefit from free money from your company, essentially. So they have to pay into your pension kind of from their own pockets. Once your funds are within a pension, they'll be invested, and there's often lots of options available to you in terms of how they're invested. And then the main quirk with pensions is that you can't access the funds until age 55. So they really have to be treated as a very longer term savings vehicle. That's why they're really used for kind of funding you after work. So we think it's really important to be engaged with your pensions. The value of them over time is going to depend on how much you and your employer pay in, and then equally how well the underlying investments perform within the pension. And there's a few questions that I've just noted here that it's worth kind of asking or kind of investigating. First of all, it's worth pointing out the pensions you build up through work and through separate employers don't follow you from job to job. So each job will have its own separate pensions, its own separate pension pot. And if you move jobs, you'll typically be set up with a new pension pot, meaning that, over time you can start to build up, a number of different pensions. I think the government estimates are that people would have 11 jobs over their career. So, with auto enrollment now in place, whereby companies have to set up a company pension, you can see how you could start to build up, pensions. They might not be too hard to keep track of at kind of the early part of your career, but give it sort of 10 or 20 years, you might find it quite difficult to keep track of, those pensions that you've built up 10 or 20 years ago. So it's a really good idea to kind of keep track of those and have a note of where they are. One of the best ways to do that is to register for online access. So your pension provider nowadays will typically have like an online portal whereby you can add in your personal details and view your pension online. So see the value of it, how it's invested, and make changes to things like your personal details. So that's a good way to kind of keep track of them and not lose them. Because in fact, I suppose the two main ways or reasons that people lose track of pensions over time is by moving jobs, but also just by moving house. So it's important to make sure your address details are up to date with your pension provider, so they can write to you, over time when you're going to be able to access the funds. As I said, one of the ways that your funds in your pension will build up is by the contributions that you and your employer pay in. There's minimum contribution amounts under auto enrollment, so the minimums that you and your employer have to pay in, they're a percentage of your salary. That said, you're free to pay in more into a pension if you want to and if you can afford to. And equally, your employer may choose to pay in more than the minimum. So it's a good idea just to check that you are getting the most from your employer, and whether they might be able to pay in more if you ask them or if you pay in a certain amount. And finally, like I said, the other bit behind pensions and what the value will be in future years is how do the underlying investments perform. So kind of without knowing it, you may feel that you've never kind of explored investing before, but we're all investors without really doing anything through our company pension schemes. Your pension fund will be invested in an investment fund, and you usually have a choice about how that's invested. So there'll be a range of funds available to you. What we're seeing as a company more recently now actually is more of a focus on people wanting their pensions to be invested in a certain way. So particularly, investing in a more ethical or sustainable manner. So there's lots of questions we're being asked about how these pension schemes are set up, and whether they can be set up to invest in a more sustainable manner. And there's also there's lots more traction kind of coming up on this kind of area of investing. You might have seen a campaign recently called "Make My Money Matters." Something to look up if not. But really, it's a campaign that's calling for UK pension schemes to be invested in a more sustainable manner. So trying to make sure pensions kind of do good rather than doing harm. And I suppose the thinking behind it is that in the UK there's £3 trillion invested in company pension scheme or in pension schemes. So they can have a real. The thought is there can be a real impact in terms of, you know, if those funds are all invested in a more sustainable manner, you know, that could have a real impact in terms of, you know, say tackling climate change, or, you know, just investing ethically and it being more sustainable going forwards. So that's something that, you know, you can explore with your pension scheme. You know, what are your ethical or sustainable investment options, and you can ask the questions. That's, you know, that said, you know, whatever your thoughts are on investing, you know, in an ethical or sustainable manner, you know, whether you're happy to have your pension exposed to kind of oil companies or arms, or, you know, any kind of sort of less ethical industries, if you like. I think the important thing is just to make sure you're, you know, aware of how your pension is invested and just be engaged in how it's doing. So hopefully there's some kind of simple things that kind of everyone can do to get on top of their personal finances. Just to run through. So first thing, everyone should make a budget. Try and get into a savings habit as soon as you can. So really build that savings into your spending plan. Keep an eye on, you know, how you are spending. If you can cut back on things that can help you save more, or have, you know, more to spend on the things you want to spend, that's a good thing to do. Use online banking or mobile budgeting apps to help you with that. Try to build up and maintain, you know, an emergency fund, just in a normal savings account, just to fall back on if you have any emergencies or you find yourself outside of work. As I said before, kind of 3 months is the typical 3 months worth of essential outgoings is the typical amount we'd suggest holding for that purpose, but could be more or less than that depending on your circumstances. Stay on top of debt, and equally don't overpay for, you know, the services you receive. So think about, you know, what you pay for your household bills and shop around. Did you have any questions, Matt, that cropped up? Or
Hello. Well, firstly, James, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I think there's a lot there for everyone to learn. I've certainly learned some stuff that I need to implement in my life as well. So I've taken that on board. We have had some questions. There are a few in the chat room. Some of them have been posted to everyone, but some of them to me as well. But there was a bit of a flurry when you started to talk about pensions, and I think you may have covered some of it, but I'm just going to read the questions out to you, if it's okay, so that you can just answer them directly.
Yeah, sure.
Make sure that we have covered. So I'll go through those first of all, and there are a couple of others outside of that too.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so first of all, how can you locate old pensions if you don't have the details? I could have asked that one myself.
Was it your question, Matt?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't, but I'd like to know.
It's a very good question. So I suppose the first thing to do really just to try and is to see if you can find any paperwork you might have. You know, you'd usually get sent, or you'd get sent a statement by the pension provider when you originally set up the plan. So hopefully you'd have something in the cupboard somewhere. Failing that and having no paperwork, what you could do is write a list of kind of all of the people you've ever worked for, where, you know, you might have had a company pension scheme. See if you can that can help you to kind of track them down. You could contact each of those employers. So if you can't find any paperwork, you could speak to them and ask them, you know, was there a company pension scheme? Which provider is it held with? So that can hopefully, you know, lead you in the right direction. Failing that, there is a pension tracing service, it's known. So it's a government website. If you search for pension tracing service, whereby you can put in the name of your old employer, and they'll try to point you in the direction of, you know, who looks after that pension scheme. So there are a few things. It's worth bearing in mind actually as well that, like I say, the onus currently is for people to keep track of their own pensions. There has been talk for quite a few years now about there being a pensions dashboard, so that'll be set up by the government, and it will locate. It's hopefully going to locate everyone's pensions based on their national insurance number, meaning you can then have one kind of government login that will show all of your different pension schemes. Now that's been delayed for quite a few years already. I think it's been delayed for another couple of years, and I imagine the government's probably got a few other things to be thinking about at the minute. So I think it's a good idea for everyone to sort of almost, put the onus on them and track down pensions now rather than waiting.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go through the rest of the pension questions, James, if okay. And like I said, I think you may have covered some of these, but just so you answer them all directly,
Sure.
I'll go through them. So what's best to do with the separate pensions? And is it worth combining them?
Another good question. So you can consolidate pensions. People tend to do that really just to kind of ease the ongoing management of having, say having one pension rather than having a number held in different places. Like I said, the main reason is just to ease the administration, but equally you can then have a better idea of how they're each invested and make sure they're doing the same thing and not losing track of them. That said, there's no right or wrong answer really, and there are some things that you should watch out for if you are thinking of consolidating them. So the main thing, and it's something you'd want to ask to each of the pension providers you have, is if you were to move the pension, whether there'd be any exit penalties. So some providers might, apply a penalty if you move away from them. Really, they're just trying to keep hold of you as a customer. Equally, there may be kind of safeguarded benefits specific to a pension plan that would be lost if you were to transfer away. So equally, they're kind of things you should be asking of the pension providers. Are there any benefits that I would lose on transfer? And then aside from those, it might be a case of just comparing the cost and the investment options of different pension schemes. So, if you ask the pension provider, what's the annual cost of running the pension? It's usually like a percentage fee. So a percentage based on the amount that's held in each of the pensions. So, you'll be able to see which is the most kind of cost-effective scheme. And then you can also ask them, what investment options do you have within each scheme? So that would just be, what number of funds are available to me.
Okay, thanks. I think that kind of covers this one as well. But again, let me just put it directly to you. So what do you do if you move jobs and you have a pension in one place and the new company you're working for has theirs in a different place? I mean, I suppose, do you have any options there? Or...
Technically you do. Like an employer could pay into a different scheme. But what we tend to find, it is, I'd almost accept that this is the case, that an employer will typically only pay into one scheme. So they'll have set up a pension scheme for all of their employees, and they'll only pay into that one scheme with that one provider. So you can continue to hold, and this goes back to kind of whether to consolidate or not. You can hold different pension schemes with different providers. When you leave the job, all that really happens is that you and your employer won't be paying into the old pension scheme anymore. It will just stay as it is, and it will remain invested. Equally, you can typically still make changes to it if you want to, but yeah, your employer will typically only pay into one pension scheme.
Okay.
So the call is whether you want to consolidate or not. Like I said, there's those questions you should ask to make it to make sure consolidating would be in your best interests.
Okay. I've got one more about pensions as well, James. And again, I think you covered it, but is there anything else to add? So do you recommend pension pot providers to combine, and such as Pension B, or is there a benefit to moving all the funds over to your existing provider? Like I said, I think you've covered most of that, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I haven't got any particular comment on kind of companies like Pension B. I've not had experience of them actually. I guess what they're potentially just doing is doing the work that you could do yourself. So like I say, when you have different pension schemes, you can do all of this work yourself. You can set up a new pension scheme, a completely new pension scheme, or consolidate into one of your either the scheme you're currently paying into, or if you had an older pension scheme that you particularly liked, that was low cost or had some valuable benefits that you wanted to hold on to, or specific investment options available within the scheme, it's something you can just do that yourself. I think things like pension are just doing that work for you and putting it into a like a consolidated pension scheme.
Okay, and how about the amount? There's another question. You're not necessarily dictated to on the amount that you want to invest in a pension. And would you recommend, say, a percentage of income?
It's a really good question. There's no real magic number in terms of like what you should be paying into your pension. It's because it really depends on so many factors, and actually it almost can kind of come down to your priorities as well. So as I mentioned before, with pensions, you can't touch them until currently age 55. There is talk that will actually increase in future years as well. So there's talk that the government will increase the age you can access pensions from 55 to 57 to be, they effectively want to keep a 10-year differential between the state pension age, which will be moving to 67, so moving the minimum pension age to 57. Hope that's not too confusing. But with that in mind, it's worth bearing in mind. So pensions are very much a longer term thing. So, it's hard to say any specific or percentages to pay into your pension. You might have other things you want to save for. So, you might have shorter term goals, like say saving for a house, something like that. Or you might just want more flexibility in terms of, being able to access those funds before age 55. And I think in terms of actually getting an idea of what you might be able to save, and this again comes back to the kind of saving on a regular basis, I think it's a good idea to get an idea of exactly what you can afford to save each month. Then you can decide whether it goes towards a longer term pension or building up your short term cash savings, or whether you maybe want to consider essentially like investing outside of your pension, which is possible as well. And then you can kind of take it from there. With some of the pension providers as well, if you register for online access, they often have kind of projection tools that you can use. So you can actually input the value of your pension, and it will project what they think the value will be kind of when you come to draw on the funds, so from age 55. And what you can do with those tools is show the impact of, say, increasing your pension contributions, or say like adjusting the risk profile attaching to your pension. To try and get an idea of, what kind of level of withdrawals your pension might be able to support in the future. And that might kind of, give you an idea of whether you might want to increase your contributions or not.
Thank you. There's obviously a lot in and around pensions. Thanks for going into so much detail. That's good. There's some other stuff as well, James, that we've got a bit more time that I'd like to put forward to you. So I've got a couple of questions here. Tips for choosing a bank to open a high interest savings account. And any advice on how many banks and accounts that you should have and why? Because they serve different purposes, right?
Sure. So yeah, as a sort of general statement in terms of looking for like the best bank accounts, I'd suggest really just using like online comparison websites. So lots of different ones online, which all really just compare the various savings accounts and different bank accounts available on the market, what the current interest rates are. Interest rates are at historic lows in the UK currently, so you're not going to get much on your savings at the minute, but nevertheless, it can pay to kind of shop around and make sure you're getting the best rate you can. The interest rates are often, between different bank accounts, are often driven by kind of the level of access you want to your savings. So, for example, for those kind of emergency savings that I mentioned before, that rainy day fund that you draw on for emergencies, you really want kind of an instant access or easy access account that you can access without any penalties or delays on getting the funds. If you are prepared to kind of lock your funds away for longer, so you can consider things like fixed rate bank accounts, for example, which you would say lock the funds away for a year or 3 years or 5 years, they can sometimes give you a bit of a better rate. And equally, like I said, there's high interest accounts or regular savings accounts that often provide a bit of a better rate than you would get on a current or like instant access account. So really just use online comparison websites and look through the different options and just see how they compare. So, you know, is it worth locking your funds away compared with just having it in an easy access account?
Okay, thank you. So I think related to the subject around saving, someone said, should I try to pay off my student loan before starting to save money?
I think our general view on this is, well, really, you know, a student loan is typically one of the kind of lowest, like the lowest kind of paying debts that you'll have. So we don't see there's a particular rush to repay that, you know, over the amounts that you're paying kind of, you know, automatically. Again, that's something that you can do. There are calculators that you can use online through kind of comparison websites that just show whether it might be in your interest to pay off things like student loans. I think our general view is that it's probably better to build up savings rather than kind of focusing intently on paying off your student loan as quick as you can. Because equally, kind of funds paid towards paying off your student loan, you know, that's less funds that you can then use towards general savings, paying into your pension, or even kind of using them towards kind of getting a loan on or a mortgage on buying a property, for example.
Okay, thanks. Somebody asked about accountants, James. Like my dad's got an accountant because he's my dad. He's 70 and he's got more money than me. He just needs it managing. But how about like I don't? And if anybody was in their sort of mid-20s that doesn't have a huge amount of savings, just has some, is there a level of advice and accountancy services that you can opt into?
So sorry, whether it's worth having an accountant, essentially?
Yeah, basically. And is it just, what are the options there?
Sure. So, well, lots of people will find that, you know, they don't specifically need an accountant. So, you know, most people's tax affairs will kind of be handled automatically, really. So, you know, if you're employed and you're paid, you know, through payroll, you know, typically all your tax will be handled and paid automatically. So there won't be much to do there. Where an accountant might kind of come into play more is if you have kind of different sources of income where you might need to complete a tax return, for example. So really, you only typically need to do a tax return if you're earning over £100,000 a year, or if you have kind of additional income, or income in addition to, say, like earnings through work, you know, through employed work. So if you had like a rental property or you did kind of self-employed earnings, that's kind of where like an accountant could come into play. So they typically will help with like preparing and submitting tax returns. But as I say, lots of people, you know, if you're just employed and, you know, you're employed and your only real savings are kind of, you know, your cash savings or building up through a pension, often people don't have an accountant.
Okay, thanks. And there's just one last area that I don't think we've covered in that much detail, and you might have some advice around it. And it's got to be the property ladder. Yep. I'm addicted to Rightmove. I'm not moving house, but I'm just addicted to it, and I'm astounded at what house prices are at the moment. Have you got any advice for people that might be looking at that and thinking, oh, how the hell?
So really, for people trying to get on the property ladder, mostly.
Trying to get on it, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as a starting point, I think, you know, if you're, you know, hoping to get onto the property ladder, I think the first thing you should do is get an idea of like what you can borrow. So use like online mortgage calculators. Yeah. So when you buy back to basics, when you buy a property, you typically put down a cash deposit. That's usually a minimum of 10% of the property's value, and that's cash savings that you've built up that you put as a deposit on the house. The remaining 90% in that case would then be funded by a mortgage. The mortgage that you can attain is typically based on an income multiple, so a multiple of your earnings, and that will depend on how much you can borrow from a lender. So that's a good starting point. Like I say, do a mortgage calculator to see, you know, how much you can borrow, then see like how much you can start to build up, get into that regular savings habit to try and build up your savings. That'll give you kind of almost a starting point of, you know, what might be achievable in terms of the property you could afford to buy. And from there, you can kind of think about, how your income might, how quickly you want to get onto the property ladder, firstly, what kind of property you'd feel was acceptable to move into, and what areas you might want to think about moving to, and what's achievable. And then you can get an idea of, how much you might need to save over, the next year or the next 5 years to have a sufficient deposit to buy that house. So that's the starting point. There are then also kind of some schemes like Help to Buy schemes you can think about as well. So there's saving schemes. So namely, you've got Help to Buy ISA, which you can't open anymore, but you can still pay into one if you've got one, and the Lifetime ISA. They're essentially kind of savings accounts that you can pay into, and the government will give you a 25% bonus on your savings if you use them to buy a qualifying property. So they're a really valuable way of a really helpful way of building up savings if you're going to, if your priority is on building up funds towards buying your first home. And equally, another thing you can do some research on is like the other Help to Buy schemes, things like the Help to Buy equity loan or shared ownership. They're government schemes that can effectively reduce the amount of borrowing and deposit you need to get onto the property ladder by buying a particular house. So for the Help to Buy equity loan, you get a separate loan from the government to help you buy a new build. And with shared ownership, that's about you buy a share of a property rather than buying the house outright. So again, meaning you don't need to build up as much in terms of a deposit, and you don't need to be able to borrow as much.
Yeah, I was on mute. I had something else that came through quickly, James, just to clarify something for someone.
Yeah.
When was it that it became, I suppose, law or a rule that companies started paying into your pension for you? Because I think somebody on the call wants to look back at previous roles and when that might have taken place.
Yeah, good question. Racking my brains.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, good one. Auto enrollment came into play in 2012, I believe. But it's quite hard to give a fixed date on that because different companies had different dates in terms of when they were obliged to set up companies, to set up pension schemes for their employees, which largely depended on just how big the company was.
Okay, it's likely.
I think it's 2012 when I think that initially came into play.
Okay.
So hopefully not too long to have to look back for pension schemes.
Great. Well, James, I know there's some in the chat, but I've also had a lot of messages just coming through to me as well, saying thank you and how informative that was. We're all good now. I think we've answered everybody's questions, and we're sort of approaching our limit on time. Sure. So I think I'll wrap up. Thanks. Really, really interesting. I'm not very good with personal finances, and but I understand and I have first-hand experience of the impact it has on your mental well-being when you don't look after them, and and I really do regret that. But luckily now that my wife, Mrs. Sullivan, is, and I was just downstairs and I had to say, can everyone, to the kids, can it be a bit quiet? I've got a call. And she said, what's it on? She said, show them this book. So here's my tip for everyone. I don't know if you can see that. This is the tip from Mrs. Sullivan. It's a book called The Real Life Money Journal, and comes highly recommended by the boss. So look out for it, everyone, if you get a chance. I'm sure it's available on Amazon somewhere. Okay. Well, look, lots of thank yous. James, really interesting. Thank you very much. Everyone, go and get those savings accounts sorted, and I'm sure we know a lot more about pensions.
There you go.
It's really useful stuff. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed that. See you in 2 weeks. Remember, you can look online to get an idea of what's coming up. But in 2 weeks' time, we've got something very different. We've got an ex-police hostage negotiator joining us that's going to talk to us about how to negotiate when you've got nothing to negotiate with. So
more interesting.
Yeah, not at all. Different, just as interesting. So please get yourself online and register for that one. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you. Thanks again, James.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.